Cops can officially steal your stuff. The Supreme Court ruled last week there's no need for the state to provide a preliminary hearing to determine whether police can keep your property in civil forfeiture cases. Now, civil asset forfeiture is the standard the police can follow when someone is stopped or arrested. They're allowed to seize personal property in cases when there is an incident to the arrest. This comes just after Biden announced $37 billion in new law enforcement funding that would add an additional 100,000 additional police officers to the streets. That's about a 14% total increase in police in the country, given that there are about 708,000 full-time officers on the streets now, at least according to 2022 numbers. Now, notably, that announcement comes as violent crime rates continue to drop around America. Now, America's use of police in its war on crime might just be the longest war in the history of the country. And what has it led to? Assaults on the country's poorest communities, trillions put into the prison system, and now this.
Over 2,800 arrests have taken place, meanwhile, at protests on college campuses. College campuses across America over the past month at these pro-Gaza protests. Videos of violent clashes between the police and the protesters have gone viral on social media over the past several weeks, including police taking down students and professors and dismantling student encampments. Pictures circulated online of professors bleeding after altercations with the police at Washington University in St. Louis, Dartmouth, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Students were tear-gassed by officers at Virginia Commonwealth University and University of Southern Florida.
News and politics editor at Teen Vogue, Lex McMillan, writes in a new article on the police involvement in the protests, it is clear that the police are not showing up to protect students. According to two professors at Columbia University's sister school, Barnard College, students arrested by police at the protest on the Columbia campus 2 weeks ago were denied food and water for 16 hours while in jail. Other students reported they were beaten by police officers after their arrests and that they were held in mouse-infested cells. So the question becomes, what is the role of police today and what should it be? It's also notable, an undercovered aspect of the Columbia raid on Hind Hall a couple of weeks ago was that a gun was discharged by a police officer inside of the building, presumably accidentally, but one can imagine that that sort of a raid could go very differently. So when you see this confluence of things, Robby, I know that you have been a vocal critic of asset forfeiture, the Supreme Court saying, hey, if you lent your friend your car, they were arrested, drugs were found on them, the car was taken by the police, you don't have rights to get that car back. You weren't involved. There's no allegation that you were involved. You're just SOL. That combined with the fact that there's this huge acceleration of how many police officers are going to be on the street, the criticism of police officers during actual emergencies like Uvalde, and then contrast to when the police seem to be really engaged and really active and deployed and weaponized against people who are demonstrating their free speech rights. I mean, should people be concerned about the ratcheting up of police at a time when crime is coming down because it seems to be a pretext for using police for other kind of anti-democratic behaviors?
Yeah, this Supreme Court case is very troubling for fans of civil liberties. It is, as you said, that the cases involved two examples where someone who wasn't even the owner of the car was charged with a drug-related crime while driving the car. And in the one case, it was marijuana possession and drug paraphernalia, something that a lot of people, myself included, don't even think should be illegal in the first place. And then they seized the car, and then it took this woman, she was the mother of the person who was driving the car, it took her, she did get the car back, but it took 20 months. So this case was whether you had, right to a speedy trial. Well, shouldn't that apply to if they just take your, and they can take and keep your car for months. I mean, they try to keep it for years. Some of these state laws have gone on the books in many places to stop that practice. But this question was, well, does the Constitution already say you have to at least have a speedy trial if they're going to try to keep this stuff? And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, even though many of the conservatives, Gorsuch and Thomas, had in previous cases expressed some skepticism about this practice, nevertheless said there was no right to a speedy trial in this case, which is deeply unfortunate because the police in many states, again, if there's no protection against asset forfeiture, they can keep your stuff even if they never charge you with a crime. It's a totally different standard for the things seized in pursuit of possible charges. And what people worry about, including my colleagues at Reason Magazine who write about this issue a lot, is that if there's a very low standard for the police to be able to seize and then keep things from you, and sometimes the police are literally keeping them, like the cars, and there are cases where they seized like stereos and electronics and TVs, and then that just gets kept by the police officers. So they have tremendous incentive to raid you and to charge you if they're going to be able to keep the stuff they get from you. Those are very perverse incentives, without even going into like larger questions about what is the role of police, like even very well-behaved or confined police departments would have incentive to take stuff if they could do that. But it speaks to, in addition to just hiring a lot of police officers, it speaks to the importance of determining, well, what are the police officers doing? And in this case, we actually need reform to the laws on the books, because if there's a lot more cops and they're just going to be arresting people for nonviolent marijuana possession, something that should not even be a crime. And Biden has said mixed signals, but sometimes indicates that he doesn't think should be a crime, maybe, and then goes back and doesn't do anything about it.
Biden has been hawkish on drugs for his entire career.
Not for his own son, but yeah.
Exactly. He is the author of the crime bill. It's something that was considered to be very detrimental to his electoral chances at one point in recent history, back in the 2020 race. And it seems like that is still affecting his decision making. It would be such an easy mulligan, an easy layup for him to come out against this sort of thing. But I think that the real core issue here is that there are a lot of pretexts that disproportionately fall on poor and working class people that can enable them to get pulled over. We've seen this in the Philando Castile case when he was pulled over repeatedly because of a broken taillight. He was at school. He worked in the cafeteria at I believe a middle school or an elementary school, was not a affluent person, struggled to pay to fix his car, and eventually, after the umpteenth stop, found himself shot dead by a police officer. These kinds of things put you in close proximity with the police over and over and over again, and it raises the possibility of physical harm coming to you, and also the possibility of your belongings being seized, potentially auctioned off by the police and retained to pad the police budget, which don't need any help, it seems, because Joe Biden is now saying that he's going to have a 14% increase in the total police on the street in the country, with this $37 billion in new law enforcement funding at a time when he can't even argue it's because violent crime is up. So what is the justification? Well, what we're seeing is the police being deployed in very specific ways. They are being deployed to undermine protests that are happening across the country, protests of Joe Biden's own foreign policy. And I think that we saw this happening in a different country. That crime is down, but there is an emphasis on funding the police more, getting more cops on the street, at the same time when human beings are protesting the policy of the leader of the country. We would say that's an authoritarian ratcheting up of state troops in order to prevent dissent in what is a so-called democracy.
I mean, it's ironic because I think I just looked up the statistic to be reminded of it. Many large cities run by Democrats continuously increase funding to the police, and cities run by Republicans continuously reduce funding to police, because especially at the more local level, Republicans are sometimes a little bit more true to their word on reducing government services and funding for the government. At the national level, it's they're spending just as wildly as anyone else. But for all the Democrats embracing defund the police, blah, blah, blah. In practice, no.
They did.
And in fact, the reverse
that was
the case
so
in some
frustrating
places.
in 2020. Democrats, this is like the theme of the day, it seems. If you watch the A Block, you know what I'm about to say. Democrats always run to the right. They never, what was so frustrating about the defund the police rhetoric and how everyone blamed it for progressive defeats down ballot, for people like Bernie not being as successful, even though even he didn't really embrace that kind of a slogan or a principle, is that nobody was actually defunding the police. And yet the left, the liberals, got all the blame in the world for it anyway. And it didn't win any new voters from the right. No conservatives think, oh yes, Joe Biden is funding the police more, and so I'm going to support him. He might as well have done the thing that would have at least secured for him the progressive vote and actually defund the police. If you're going to get blamed for it anyway, do the thing, not because it's just a slogan or that people are upset about it, but because there is research, there's evidence that shows that if you actually want to bring down crime, you do the opposite of what someone like Mayor Eric Adams has done. You fund libraries, you fund social programs, you fund things for kids to do when they're out of school. You fund schools so they have the opportunity to engage in music classes and other kind of extracurriculars. Instead of defunding all of those things, shutting down the libraries on the weekend when people actually want to use the libraries, instead put cops in the subways to read their phone while they check your bags and turn the New York subway system into TSA.
Right. It certainly matters what specific kinds of police services are being funded. There are I think a lot of American people think that if it's more funding or more police for actual, solving homicides
crimes,
or sexual assaults, those kinds of things, that would be great.
Yes.
If it's just, pulling over more people for nonviolent trivial offenses and then keeping their stuff,
keeping their cars.
That's not what we want.
And remember, for a working class person, that could be thwarting someone's ability to get to work. Not everyone lives in a coastal city with good public transportation. When people lose the control of their vehicle, they can lose their jobs.
Yeah.
An entire household could have been supported by that
would be
woman.
a massive inconvenience. You don't even have to be like low income or living on. That would be a massive imposition for a moderately well-to-do or middle-class person. That'd be awful.
And with the cost of cars right now and insurance rates right now, it really is turning the screw. So I'm so glad we brought attention to this particular set of cases. Let us know what you think about all this in the comments and stick around. We've got a lot more rising coming up for you next.